Hi, welcome to this week's Authors Love Readers podcast, where we delve into the stories behind the stories. We're asking authors questions, some of them fun, some of them serious, and from their answers, you're going to learn things you never knew about the people who write the stories you love. My name is Patricia McLinn. I'm your host and designated question asker.
I'm Toni Anderson, and I'm an author who loves readers.
Now, let's start the show. Hi, welcome to this week's edition of Authors Love Readers podcast. My guest this week is Toni Anderson. Now, we haven't known each other real long, but we met through doing a group box set. And for readers who get these, you have an opportunity to read lots of different authors and get acquainted and see how you fit as a reader-author match. For the authors, it can be fun. It can also be a little crazy. And I think I was drawn to Toni because she was so down to earth, reasonable, and reliable. And then we hit it off. We met in person a couple times, and most recently, I think it was at the Writers Police Academy last summer, right?
Right.
Yeah, and we had a lot of fun then. So that gives you some hint that we were both at the Writers Police Academy, that Toni writes books, I would say romantic suspense, and you do quite a bit of military, right?
At the moment, I'm mainly FBI agents. So.
Oh, fascinating. You need an FBI Writers Academy.
Oh, yes, I would love that.
And tell us a little bit about what you're writing right now.
I'm writing something called the Cold Justice series, which I started about 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, and it's done very well, so I just kept going. And it's all generally FBI agents, but there's spin-off characters too, so it's I'm not really restricted in any way, so which I like.
That's wonderful. Yeah, no restrictions, my kind of thing. So before we get deeper into the writing, let's talk about some things to let the readers get to know you as a person. And we'll start off, I'll toss you an easy one. What's your favorite color and why?
My favorite color is probably orange, and I don't really know why, but I have coats. My bike is orange. I would love an orange car. I don't know. I think maybe the red-orange thing. I don't know. I like the passion thing, but it's a very vibrant color, and I love it.
See, I knew I liked you. Okay, and here's one of the theories. I've talked about this before on the podcast with Emily Richards. What do you think about purple?
I like purple. It's kind of a more mellow color, but I like it. I did art at school as well, so another secondary color. It's good. I don't know. I have nothing against purple.
Well, there goes our theory, because Emily loves purple and doesn't like orange, and I love orange and don't like purple, and they're like on opposite sides of the color wheel, right?
Yes.
So that was our theory, and you just blew it, Toni.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Maybe I just like secondary colors.
Well, we'll give you another shot here. Do you have any strong fears, and have you used those fears in books?
Oh, well, I do have some strong fears, and I tend to avoid those in books as well as in real life. I hate heights. I never used to hate heights, and then I got to about 22, and I suddenly realized that the idea of falling off from a great height might not be a good thing. So it's very strange. I never had it, and then all of a sudden it just clicked on, and I was like, ooh, yeah, no, I don't want to get near that edge. So that's one of them. And my other fear is spiders, and I scream when I see a spider.
Really?
Yes.
I would not have expected that of you. That's interesting. And you don't use that in the books. Why?
I don't know. I don't really want to revisit those things too much. And also, I don't really like telling people my fear. I have this theory that the more your weakness you reveal about yourself, the more likely you are to get a spider in your bed.
I promise I never will do that. I promise. So, okay. What's your favorite taste?
Well, I love lots of different tastes. I am a chocolate addict, so I'd have to go with chocolate.
Oh, I love chocolate too. So this is my weird question. Are you left-handed or right-handed? That's not the weird question. That's the prelude.
I'm right-handed.
So on your right hand, is your index finger or your ring finger longer?
They're exactly the same then.
Oh, I wonder what that means. I have no idea. I have no idea what any of this means.
Does it mean I'm a
It's
serial
just
killer?
fascinating to me. Could be. Could be. That's first person research, huh?
On my other hand, my ring finger is slightly longer on my left hand, and I'm almost ambidextrous, but not quite. So maybe I don't know if that means something.
Well, I said this before. Someplace I learned one little thing about handwriting, that supposedly the left hand is what you're born with and the right hand is what you make of yourself. Although I don't know if that switches if you're left-handed. Although I'm not really sure that logic is a strong basis.
I had my palm read once many, many years ago, and I was told I had a strong writer's fork, so I thought that was good.
Did they know you were a writer?
I don't think I was a writer even then. I think I might have been my old job.
Okay, then I will not diss hand palm reading. So, okay. Is there something earlier in your life and this is interesting, especially because you said that earlier in your life you weren't afraid of heights and then you became so. So, are there things from earlier in your life that you worried about or fretted about, and now you think, who cares?
Well, I mean, I grew up in the 70s, I suppose. It was all about incoming nuclear war from wherever, and so that seems to have gone full circle again. But I think on a personal level, I would say makeup. When I was at school, I wore makeup, and I carried on wearing makeup probably until I was in my early 20s. And then one day, I was actually on a boat with about 60 male sailors. There was a couple of other women, but there was really just us. And I was thinking, why am I wearing makeup? I literally, literally had, you know, I just realized at that moment that men really didn't care. Not that I wore it for men, but it was just one of those defining moments when you suddenly realize that I didn't have to wear makeup just for the sake of it. So I still wear it for special occasions, but I don't bother on a daily basis.
I tend to wear it at conferences.
Yes.
And why? I don't know why we're doing that, Toni, but okay.
I know, and for other women too, and I do.
I know.
And that's not a problem for me either. I think we women do dress up for other women more than we dress up for men a lot of the time.
So this I'm going to do a follow-up question, and it may also connect with another question I was going to ask you, which was, have you had any interesting and strange jobs? But my follow-up question is, why were you on a boat with all these guys sailors?
Yeah, well, I used to be a marine biologist, although I may be a research scientist within the marine biology field. And so one of my postdocs, I was chasing Arctic char around northern Labrador, and we were quartered on a former icebreaker, former Coast Guard icebreaker, which has changed names. It was the Sir John Franklin. So I had a fantastic time. I was helicoptered off this boat on probably twice a day to our research site, and then helicoptered back on again, and it was all very exciting.
How cool. Now, how did you get from that to writing?
Well, I don't think it's an uncommon transition, but me and my husband are both scientists. And when we moved back from Canada, which is where I was when I did that postdoc, back to Scotland again, we had just got married and we were having a family. So I don't want to say I quit science, but I kind of did quit science. And I don't think he realized at the time that I was never going back. But I had first my daughter, and I started writing with her. And my husband's postdoc at that time was based between Scotland and Australia, so we were constantly traveling between Scotland and Australia. So it was hard to get a job for myself that fitted in with his life, and then fitted in with a young child, and then having another child not long afterwards. So it kind of started then, and I guess it's one of those things where I always had a love of reading, and I just kind of ran out of books in the 2000s, and I think maybe I'd read several thousand and finally decided that I might have a go myself. So that's how it started.
So, with the first book that you tried, what kind of story was it? Was it a romantic suspense, or was it a romance, or was it mystery, or
It was a romantic suspense, but I kind of it took me 5 years to write this book, and I put in pretty much every trope you can imagine, and it got published, and it was actually published, and it is probably one of my most popular books. Um, but it very much, for me, I feel that it has, a lot of structural errors, a lot of, the more you learn, the more you, you realize what you're not supposed to do,
yes?
and yeah, it's pretty much all in that book. But readers like it, so.
Well, and that's so interesting. The first thing that I wrote, first completed book that I wrote. Now you say you had a lot of the tropes, but I had a lot of genres. I think I got in just about everything except for sci-fi and horror. I had a mystery, I had a romance, I had international intrigue, I had sports, I had, I had it all in there. And I look at it and I still love those characters, and I just don't see a way to rescue that book.
Oh.
So, yeah, I should offer it to the truly deluded readers who who think they'd be interested
Like
in it.
everything.
Did you have a story or a book when you were growing up that you think really got you addicted to reading and to story in general?
So I grew up in kind of quite a poor um, family, working class family in the UK. And so we didn't have a lot of books. Obviously, I had access to the library, but I did discover the Silver Brumby series by Lynn Mitchell, all about
Hmm.
brumbies in Australia. And I devoured that series, and I think I read the series probably 50 times. I mean, I would just finish it and immediately go back to the beginning and start reading it again. So that's the one series and author that made me fall in love with writing and stories, not writing, stories.
That's wonderful. Now, Brumby, is that a family name then?
Brumby is actually an Australian term for a wild horse. So Silver Brumbies was the whole series, and
Oh,
yeah, it was lovely, lovely series.
okay.
I made my children read it
Okay.
too.
So a number of the people I've talked with, we've come back to like, oh, Farley was the author, Black Stallion,
Oh yeah,
and
yeah.
yeah, and also there were books by Marguerite Henry, The Misty of Chincoteague.
Yes, I read all those too, but I got to tell you, the
Yeah.
Australian Silver Brumbies were the best. It's for me.
Oh, I wish I'd known about those at that time, because I devoured all of those. Also, the dog books. Albert Payson Terhune did the Lad, a Dog, and Lassie, the
Oh,
original Lassie. And I grew up with
of
collies and
course.
have collies now, so those are very close to my
Oh
heart.
yeah.
Those are wonderful. Those are a new series I hadn't heard about, so that's terrific. Growing up with your folks, they probably had sayings that they said. Do you have any that you're using now that you feel like, oh my gosh, my mother, father just came out of my mouth?
Not so much now, but when the kids were a certain age, I remember saying things terrible things, actually, things like "wait till your father gets home," things like that, which is just awful. And I just think, oh God, that's my mother talking right there. And they always used to look at me as if to say, "Well, what difference does that make?"
Yeah. That's not much of a threat,
No,
Mom.
no.
I don't necessarily use it, but I always remember my mother saying the ultimate curse from her, who never cursed, was, "I hope you have a child just like yourself." Thought that was pretty
That is
mean.
pretty mean.
Okay, when you're writing, do you have a bad habit word or phrase that you have to go back and remove?
I have a lot of them, but I use just every other sentence, I think.
Oh, see, we are kindred souls.
I go through and do a search for it, and I'm like, yep, take that one out, and take that
Yeah.
one out, and take that one out.
I also do really, and less often very.
Yeah.
And somebody just mentioned the other day, actually, and I'm thinking, ooh, I better search for that too.
Yeah,
It's
I've
terrifying.
become, I don't know if I haven't become better when I'm writing my first draft, but I have become more aware when I'm reading it over for edits.
Mhm.
And I guess
Mhm.
that's when it counts. So,
Do you ever find that some books have their own particular peculiar, um,
oh
bad
yeah.
habit? Yeah.
And the word
What is
just pops out,
that?
and every time you see it, then you pop, and it's probably only 3 or 4 times in the whole book. But I don't know, you just notice it, and that's why it's so important to have a good editor, I think.
True. Absolutely true. Okay, I have this bizarre desert island. So you're stuck on this desert island, and yet it has the ability to play movies, but only 3 movies. So for as long as you're on this desert island, you can only watch 3 movies. What 3 movies would you choose?
Okay, I would choose Love Actually, because
Mm.
that's a movie we watch every single Christmas. Return of the King. I just watched the extended version, so it'd have to be the extended version, and that's nearly 5 hours right there of movie. And I think Dirty Dancing, because I do love that movie, and it's fun and it's romantic, and there's music in it, so that would.
And great music, yeah, yeah. A lot of music you can keep singing, so,
When you're waiting for
um,
rescue.
do you have a motivational or upbeat saying that you use a lot?
I do. Well, this is one of the things I think to myself on a regular basis. Never, never, never give up by Winston
Ah,
Churchill.
Winston Churchill, yes, that's a good one.
He pretty much has a quote for everything. So,
Much lesser offspring of that. I like to say the goal is to hang around long enough that good things can happen, so
that's a good
which
one.
can only happen if you never give up.
That's right. That's right. I was thinking maybe I'd get that tattooed, but maybe I don't know. People might get the wrong idea.
Okay, a reader asks, where do your stories come from? I know one author who dreams her stories, another has a character suddenly taking up residence in her head. So, how are your beautiful stories born? I love that she says they're beautiful stories.
Oh, it is nice. Well, I have dreamt one opening of one of my books, but that was the only one. It was very vivid, though. It was kind of, I woke up in a cold sweat, and it was the opening of Dangerous Waters, and basically somebody's young child, is stolen away from them, and they're killed off. So that was
Um,
great, great dream. But I decided that I had to write that story. But normally it comes from a combination of I watch a lot of news, or I read a lot of newspapers and or news online, and I think these stories just kind of bombard you, and all of a sudden you just find yourself thinking, what if this is happening at that? And
mm,
not quite
mhm.
conspiracy theory nutcase, but not far off really. So yeah, mainly the news. Um, and just, I mean, I travel a lot, so you go to different places and you're kind of thinking, oh, that would make a great location for such and such, or for a murder or for an abduction, or and my poor family, literally, I'm always getting them to drive past police stations and military bases, and we have to take as many photos as possible without getting arrested. Um, so that type of thing. I think I just find inspiration in almost anything, actually.
Does it ever scare your family?
My writing.
They, the way your imagination works.
Oh yeah, I think so. I mean, I'll sit down. Sometimes we'll be maybe out to dinner, and I'll think, "Oh my God!" I'll say to them, "Oh, that would be a great way to kill someone," and they all look at me as if to say, "Oh, mom, what do you like?" And I think I'm a little overzealous on parenting safety. I mean, the poor kids, they literally everything they do, I'm like, "Be careful! Do this, do that, don't do that. Watch out! Bad people right there."
I was at a lunch a couple years ago now at Christmas time, and my grown niece looked at me and said, where's your mind going? And when I told her,
Oh,
she was like, ah! And I'm not going to say exactly because I'm using it in a book someday. But
excellent.
And that same niece, I was on a cruise not too long ago with my very first cruise, and we were in the kind of a second level of the show area, the theater, and I thought, how easy it would be, like, to blow a dart and get somebody in one of those seats below. And she's going, "Okay, I'm sitting in the upper level the whole time." Yeah, but and yet, if we were out to lunch, we'd get it completely, right?
Oh yes, no, I think writers who go out to lunch as a group are pretty scary, actually. Uh,
You said that the story Dangerous Waters, was it the story that you dreamt the beginning of?
yes,
Was that an easy book then to write, or did that make any difference in whether it was easy or not easy for you?
it was relatively easy to write, actually. I think that plot had been fermenting for quite a long time in
Mm,
my
mhm.
brain, and it's in a location, a beautiful part of the country where I wanted to set a book, on Vancouver Island, and it's on the west
Oh.
coast of Vancouver Island, on a place which is quite hard to get to, and we go regularly because there's a marine station there, and so I go with my husband, and um, it was, I think, probably coming from my imagination. Literally, I would do walk in some of these places the way some of my characters walked in these places, and feel that
Mm.
sense of danger. So it did grow very, very easily into a book.
And how, in general, do you go from an idea, whether say it comes from a news story or something you've seen, how then do you develop it into a book?
I think what tends to happen is I'll have a good idea and I'll write it down, and it doesn't really become a book until I have about three different ideas that collide and
Mm.
join together to form a real, story. Because I think it's very hard to write a book on one idea. So, and my books are way too complicated most of the time. So maybe that's the problem. But so then I'll get my three ideas and then I'll sit down and start plotting. I'm a big plotter, and I will plot out every conceivable way of getting from the beginning to the end and with some coherence. So yeah, I'm a big plotter, but I also am not. I have many different methods, so I'm kind of a messy plotter.
How do you do that? You said you write down or you plot all these conceivable routes for the story to take. Do you do that in the computer? Are you using a whiteboard? What's your actual method?
I do some on the computer, but generally I start on paper and post-it notes of every different color and size and shape you can imagine, which I have lots of. I'm staring at about 50 right now. Um, and I do have a whiteboard as well, but my whiteboard tends to be keeping all the characters in the Cold Justice series, which is what I'm working on at the moment, um, keeping them all in a location where I can just look and see the characters I have, who I've
Oh,
used, also names from secondary characters from some of the books, and make sure I either use them as another secondary character, or I don't use a name that's too close to that. So I don't want to repeat myself too much. Um,
it starts to get hard, doesn't
it
it?
starts to get hard. I'm looking at my board now, and there's probably 100 names on that easily. So yeah, that's tricky. I just tend to I figure out the main characters, who they are, and who's going to be the best antagonist for my protagonist, and yeah, it's a messy process, and I'm working on trying to streamline my plotting process. Certainly for the next book, I made a big mistake with this book, the one I'm writing at the moment,
Mm.
because I decided to kind of wing it a little bit and throw out all my experience and just think, 20 books or however many books I've written, surely I can do this a little bit more spontaneously. And yeah, no, I couldn't. So I'm editing this book, and it's taken me as long to edit as it is to write it in the first place, I think.
And I've tend to come the opposite direction where I'm very much a pantser. And I thought when I started writing mysteries and stuff that, oh well, now I've got a plot. And when I did plot, my mind said, "Okay, we've told that story. Let's go play with something else."
Yeah.
So I actually I lost a couple books
Oh,
that way.
yeah. I think it's a danger, and it is a danger I'm aware of, because, and I do understand, because the book before, so when I was plotting, just before I started writing the book I'm writing at the moment, my current book, I plotted out this amazing story that's set in Japan. It has all these, serial killers going around the world, and I plotted it out again to the degree that I was actually too bored to write the story. So
Oh dear.
that's probably why I dove into this other one. Anyway, I might go back to the Japanese one because I have plotted it out, and it is still a good story, I think. But I understand what you're saying in a big way.
You said you were talking about the whiteboard for your characters and you having all these interconnecting characters. Do you ever get surprised by, say, a secondary character in a book? You've just sort of thrown them in, and then they come back and say, "Okay, my turn. I want a story."
Yes, and also, readers will surprise me by saying, "Oh, I want to know what happens with this guy," and I'm like, "What? What do you mean this guy? This guy's not going to be a character ever. I almost killed him off." Yeah, yes, it does happen.
Close call.
Yeah, I know. Oh, I mean, the second book. So I've got Dangerous Waters, and after that, I got Dark Waters, and those books are for Montlake. And I remember when they were asking for the next book, they said, I gave them a few options. They said, "Oh no, we want this guy," and who was the ex-con brother of my hero, and it was so funny because I set him up as a complete villain, really.
Oh.
So when they and I mean, I'm obviously I made him redeemable, but it just made me laugh so much that people wanted the guy who was closest to being a villain.
One of the dangers I find is well, this goes back to the names. I'll name these secondary characters something strange um, or really bland, and then they become main characters,
Yeah,
and it's you're stuck with that name.
yeah. I when I was writing this, when I started writing Cold Justice, I knew pretty much that I wanted to write a lot of books in the series, so I've been quite careful with naming names. And the only person whose name people have ever moaned about is one of my heroes called Darsh Singh. Now, obviously, he has an Indian background via the UK, but nobody's. A couple of people complained about the name Darsh, saying it was a stupid name, and I'm like saying, it's not a stupid name.
No, no. So this is sort of what we've been talking about, but I want to say it in the words of a reader. She says, "Do you miss the characters or think about the characters once you've finished a book?" Clearly, this reader does, and then the sort of corollary is, has that then produced? Well, you've sort of said yes, but if you can give us an example, has that then led you to another book?
Yes, and I think the great joy of being self-published and writing a series is that I can write about anybody I want and who takes my fancy. So I have a very cold seeming character in the first book, A Cold Dark Place, and he's a secondary character, but he's pretty much come to dominate a lot of the other books. So that his name's Lincoln Fraser, um,
Mm,
and his own book.
great name.
His own book comes in like 4 books later. He gets his own book, but he kind of dominates the whole scene. He's an interesting character, I guess. I don't want to give away too much because if
No,
you tell
don't.
people's
Don't.
character, then you tell their whole story. But he is kind of fascinating, and I think he's somebody that people would like to meet someday. So it's not going to happen.
It's interesting. I said great name about him. Their names have such power to set the character.
They do. They do.
Yes. And I also think, and this leads to one of the questions that I like to ask, have you ever had, or do you recall an experience where you kind of woke up to the power that language can have?
It's a good question. I was a very, very quiet. Well, we have met, so I'm quite a quiet person, and I was
Yeah, but wickedly quiet.
And when I was a kid, I was super quiet and super shy to the extent where people came to the door and I would hide behind the sofa. So very quiet.
Oh.
And I think that, I've always known that language has power. And my family also are very, very sarcastic. And so, there's a lot of power in sarcasm too. So it's definitely something I've always been aware of.
Hmm. Hmm. I wonder if that is a thread among writers, um, that we've had that recognition possibly early, or at least at some point very strongly, that language has power.
Yeah.
One one of the things for me was reading Dickens' description of Uriah Heep as unctuous.
Hmm.
And still now, it just gives me the creeps. It's such a wonderful word, and it captures him in one
It is.
word.
It's brilliant.
I thought, wow. One of the readers asks if you have, let's see, let me get her question, do justice to her question. What is your favorite place to write and why? Does it have an inspirational view?
No, it does not. It has a wall. I have an office. I have an office at home, and a couple of years ago we did major renovations, and the kitchen is right next to my office, and my office is open up to the stairway. So it's kind of set in a weird place, but it was a great place when the kids were little and they would run around and do their thing, and I could still
Mm.
work away. So this is my office isn't so basically a corner of the house, and I stare at a wall with or a monitor with some calendars on it. But I'm surrounded by my things, so all my books and my research books and my post-it notes and my whiteboards and everything else, and a few things to make it pretty. But there's actually really not a lot of space to make it pretty. So my exercise bike is in here too, which is also a desk. So this is where I like to write, and I'm not very good at, even though I do write when we travel. I need long periods of time to sit and work at things to actually achieve anything. So the less sensory input, the better.
I understand that. I also think there's something of Pavlov's dogs at work, that when we find a place and we work there routinely, that then it trains your mind that when you go there, that's the writing place.
Yes, I think so too.
Do you have a routine? Do you follow certain hours or?
I do have a routine. I get up in the morning later than I should, and but not too late. The
You're
kid.
talking to the wrong person here. I think noon is
Oh,
the
oh yeah,
crack of
no.
morning,
I get up.
crack of dawn.
I guess I get up about 8 o'clock, maybe a little earlier, depending on my day. Uh, I guess 7:30, being realistic. And my kids are still in school, so they get themselves at the door. I get up, check my email, walk the dog, and I try to be back at my desk for 9. Sometimes I'm a little later, depending on the dog. And I basically sit and work all day. And if I'm writing a first draft, I have a word count goal that I want to hit, which is about 2,500 words, which is the minimum that I want to hit. And I am a slow writer, so that's pretty good for me. And once I hit that, it depends. If I have other things that I need to do, then I can switch. If I don't, if the draft is my priority, then I will just keep going for as long as possible. But I find that because my husband works late too, then we often don't even eat till about 9 o'clock at night because the kids have got their activities and jobs and various other things. So you just keep working, and then so often I'll be working till 9 and suddenly think, oh, I can stop now, and then I think, oh my goodness, that's a bit of a long day, really. But it just comes with the territory.
You mentioned if the draft is your priority. You have also mentioned you're editing the current book. Is one part of that more fun for you than another? Is there a part that you dread? What do you like in the process, and what's your not favorite part?
Well, I hate first drafts. I detest writing a first draft, and I don't really know why, but it just seems to be so ugly and messy. So, yeah, that's my least favorite part I love getting it finished, but I do love to edit, actually. And not everybody does love to edit, but it's my happy place when, except for, I have to say now, editing a mess is not fun. But normally I love to edit. You're just making things, so you go from reading something that's absolute crap to polishing it up and thinking, oh my, that's actually pretty good, or at least for a few moments that you allow yourself.
I tend to am editing a mess all the time because the way I work, I write out a sequence and I
Oh,
have,
wow.
so I'm back and forth and I have to smooth those things and connect threads and make sure I haven't dropped things here and there. So I'm used to that.
Yeah.
And, it is a challenge, but then and when you're editing, are you adding more or are you taking out more? Do you tend to, from your first draft, does it grow or does it shrink?
It always grows. Even when I cut a lot, they always grow. So I think that's why, I mean, the last book I wrote was nearly 120,000 words, I think. And
Wow.
I think the first draft was probably 100,000. So, and I'll cut out big chunks and then I look at it and it's still grown somewhere. So I think I
Mhm.
write, when my first draft, it's very basic. I'm trying to get the plot down. I'm trying to get the characters' interactions down. And then the next drafts are building on that all the time.
I was interested, at one point you said that maybe your stories are too complex.
Yes.
But you don't really think that. You're just, because it's a lot of threads to handle, but when they come together, they're wonderful.
Yes, no, I like complex plots and books, and I get very worried when things go a little bit too easily, they're too straightforward. Julie Moffett was sitting at a conference, and we were sitting in this talk or workshop, and the woman at the front just said, the most important thing is to keep things simple. And we just looked at each other because we both write very complex plots, and we both went, oh well,
Yeah.
that's us then.
I just talked to Julie. Yeah.
Oh,
That's funny. Yeah. I've also been in workshops where people said, well, you just have to plot. And I think, okay. you know, I've written 45 books, but I guess it doesn't work.
yeah. Oh, it's so important that people don't make sweeping statements about what people need to do.
I'm really curious about this because about your research. You've got to do a lot of research. Your background is in scientific research. How does the research for the books, do you approach it the same way you would approach research for scientific efforts, or is it totally different?
Research, the thing about being a scientist, especially a fish scientist, is you do a lot of experiments in the lab, so you're getting a lot of the actual raw data. Whereas, obviously, for a book, you tend to be reading things or doing the Writers Police Academy and getting to drive cars off the road, which was fantastic.
Wasn't that fun? Yes.
Oh man, actually saw that on a police video recently. So I saw I think it was on an island out in the Pacific Northwest, and I saw a police car do that to a suspect's car, and I
The
was like,
pit maneuver?
yeah, and
Yeah, yeah.
I was like, oh my god, I did that. It was so cool, and they did it so well. I was like, oh wow, that's a good job. So for research, it's similar in that it teaches you to keep digging, and I think I know your
Mhm.
background would be the same sort of deal. You just have to keep looking at different sources of information. I try very often to go. I read a lot of biographies of people who are FBI agents or cops or serial killers, psychologists, all this stuff. Most of my reading material, certainly in the day, I listen to audiobooks, so when I'm walking the dog, I'm kind of doing my research at the same time.
Mhm.
Listen to first person accounts. And I do try and talk to people, and I did go down to FBI headquarters in Washington last December. I think it was the December before last, and visited SIOC, which is the Strategic Information Operations Center there, which was
Mhm.
fantastic. And I have a couple of contacts who I'll email for more information.
Oh, that's wonderful
Yeah,
when
it
you have
is.
those.
It's
Yeah.
wonderful. But the problem, Pat, I think comes from knowing when to stop. You have to know when you don't need to know something.
But you might need it for another book.
Yeah, yeah, bookmark it.
Says that's my excuse. It may come in handy someday.
I know. I love to know stuff. I love to read stuff, but I don't. I don't retain it all. So I have to basically have it bookmark it in a position where I can find it again, because there's just so much interesting stuff out there.
If you can't find the factoid, you are still absorbing the feel of those people and what the way it sounds and how they talk and how they approach things. And that, I think, really helps a writer know when you're hitting a sour note, when you're hitting the wrong note, even though you don't have a specific necessarily. That's my excuse for lots of research.
Yeah, no, I think it's true. You get a feel, and you keep your kind of your mindset
Yeah.
in whatever mindset you're working within. So for law enforcement, I mean, I often come across people who, maybe I don't want to say anti-law enforcement, but they don't see things necessarily from a police officer's point of view. And having been to a couple of police academies and reading a million books from a police officer's or an FBI agent's point of view, you say, okay, but what about this? What about this fact? Thinking about seeing it from their angle, it definitely changes your perspective.
Now, when you were working in marine research, and I love that you call it being a fish scientist, which, I would be more careful and say you were a marine specialist, but I love that, fish scientist. I may have to call you that from now on. My impression would be that it would be male dominated. Is that accurate?
Um, Not really, to some extent. Well, it's all these things. But my undergraduate and PhD times definitely wasn't male dominated. And when I was a PhD student, starting maybe my second year, I think there was 2 male PhD students out of about 20 female PhD students.
Oh, interesting.
But it changes.
Okay.
There's a certain point, and I think when getting heading towards lecture ships, becoming professors, I think that's when there's a real drop off in female scientists. Often, you know, women have to choose basically between having a family or pursuing a career, and it's not all that way. And I do know women in science who have families and they're very successful, but you definitely see a drop off at that stage.
So, okay, so that sort of turns my question on its head because I was thinking that you had spent a lot of time in male dominated, but you didn't. So, how do you approach, or is writing male characters something you give more thought to, or it more difficult for you, or do you enjoy it? How do you approach writing the opposite sex characters?
Yeah, I do enjoy it actually. I enjoy putting myself in someone else's shoes. And I don't know, I haven't spoken to any men about how. I should ask my husband how realistic it is, but he might not want to tell me. But I know a lot of men, and even though in my experience it wasn't that male dominated, there were lots of females, but there was also a lot of males. I mean, I've worked with a lot of men and on a lot of different projects, and they do speak differently to us, and they definitely think guys do think differently to a lot of women. But also, if the more you study about psychology, and the more you find out there are different personality types as well. So
Mm.
there's so much variation with people. so I like trying to throw myself into male points of view, and I think generally they just think about things from a different angle. And women, we worry more about maybe how we're perceived, and just like but then I'm one of these people, this is my scientist brain going, my husband and I are completely different, but I'm an introvert, he's an extrovert. So even though the fact that he's a guy and I'm a girl, where do the differences come from? I don't always know.
Right.
But I do enjoy pretending to be a male and looking at the world from a male point of view.
Well, and not only a male, but the difference between at least the generalities of a scientific view and a law enforcement view. There could be some overlap, but I could also see that there could be a lot of difference.
Yeah, no, they're very, very different. Very different. And it's funny because the book I'm writing at the moment, I tend to have often my books have scientists in them, and there are definitely scientists in my current book I'm working on right now, and I have this FBI agent trying to figure out and understand all these. I don't want to say what type of scientists they are, and their speak, and he's kind of looking at them as if to say, "I have no idea what you're talking about, you complete nutcase." So yeah, it is. It's good. I know there's a big difference between the sexes, but I also believe there's a big difference, individual variation with everybody. There's my science coming out again. Individual variation with all these between people too. So
Well, let's apply that to writers then too. Do you think writers as a whole, as a group, look at the world differently from many other people?
I think we're always looking for angles for and story. We're always looking for stories behind situations. So, people can get stuck on the side of the road. Well, my husband will look at them and think, oh, I better get out and help them. I'll be looking at them thinking, oh my goodness. Now, if the wrong person came along here and stopped, then those people could be in big trouble. So yeah, I think writers, they're always looking for stories. I think we're
Mm.
wired literally to think about a situation from several different points of view all at the same time.
Oh, that's a great point. Yeah. Do you think you have changed and evolved as a writer since you were first published? And how, if you do?
I have changed a lot. I mean, over 18 years, I've become more confident, although I still don't have, I don't consider myself to be a great writer. I consider myself to be a writer who always tries to write a great book and hope for the best after that. So I've evolved. I have more confidence than I used to have, and I guess self-belief really. And although maybe it's egotistical to think, okay, but I've maybe won some contests, and I'm earning enough money to live and support myself and my family. That does give you some confidence, but I don't know that I could ever become blasé about the whole thing. I think it's something that I constantly work hard at, and I can't imagine a time when I would ever take any of it for granted. Or, but when I was starting out, I was very insecure. I guess that's why it took me 5 years to write my first book. I wanted everything to be as perfect as possible, and it still was never perfect.
I think I have this theory that if we wrote the perfect book, we would stop
Yeah,
writing. Maybe that's what Harper Lee
yeah,
did with To Kill a Mockingbird. Um, so that's my solace for not writing perfect books, that I get to keep writing.
yes. I think that's a
So,
good point.
is there something else that you are really good at that few people know about?
Well, I don't know if I'm really good at it, but I used to do a lot of art and painting and drawing, and I guess I have an
Oh,
A level in it from the UK. So I was pretty good. I still do some, again, never as good as I'd like to be, and if I'd pursued it, obviously I'd be better. But and I'm good at gardening too, so growing flowers, that's my thing.
do you think, especially the art, since you studied it in school and stuff, do things that you have learned through visual arts, have they conveyed in any way to writing?
I think possibly I like to set the scenes. Although it varies because obviously I'll set the scene, and then because of pacing thing issues I will maybe pull out some of that. But I think initially for writing a scene you want to set it very and ground it very much in an environment. So, and I see that in a visual manner, very much so.
Mm.
And It's a tricky question, actually. Um, Maybe perspective-wise, in art, you're always kind of taught about perspective and looking at things from maybe different angles as well. So yeah, maybe.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So that a question from a reader comes into this. It says, when the cover image doesn't match the character description, and the reader says, a pet peeve of mine, how does it feel for the author?
I guess it depends in some ways whether or not if it's from a publisher, or whether it's self-publishing. If you've, had your own cover designer work on it, and I think I've it's always a bit disappointing, but I think when you know the effort that your designer has put into trying to find the right cover models, and that knowledge that you probably can't afford to hire Hollywood film stars to pose the way
Mhm.
that you would like them to on your covers, um, you just have to compromise. I mean, and when it comes from a traditional publisher, then I think it's a little bit harder to swallow sometimes when characters are completely different to how you expected them to be, because of course you don't have any control then. Um, so yeah, it can be a bit of a kick, but I've never really had a bad experience in terms of the the characters looking wrong for me. I've seen it for other people's books, and you just kind of scratch your head, going, "I don't get that." But yeah, I think that the other joy, that's a joy of self-publishing, is that you can change it.
Truly. Yeah. Because I have had some of those, including one where I had a bull rider hero, and bull riders tend to be wiry.
Yeah.
And there was like this sumo wrestler in cowboy gear. Covering, who is this guy? Okay. Another reader asks, how much does it bother you to find editing errors after your book goes live or is printed?
Yeah, it's a very, very annoying and frustrating. And yeah, I kind of hate it. I hate making mistakes. So the whole, um, perfectionist gene is alive and well, even though I try to let it go. And I also accept that there will be mistakes, but yeah, no, I hate it. And I will fix as many as I can, but there comes a point, especially with print books, where it's very difficult. I actually have a really embarrassing mistake in a cold dark place. So book one of this Cold Justice series, and I had my some guy was, oh, it was actually in the second book, and I used prostate when I should have used prostrate.
Oh,
And I remember discovering that and just literally my mouth falling open, going, "Oh my god!" And all my editors and everybody missed it. And then it was one of those things. Well, maybe it was one of those errors, the last minute errors, just before a book goes, and you just, I don't know, press the wrong button or something. Because I'm thinking I would never have missed it, but there it is in print.
well, your mind knows exactly what it should be and tends to see that. It's so difficult to spot
Yes.
those. I'm a pretty good editor, but there are ones, they're going to get by anybody, everybody. So, yeah, and I don't, it drives me nuts, but I I try to, that's one of another joy of indie publishing. You can fix them,
Yes.
and I do.
Yes.
So they've had a couple questions from readers, and I'll have another one here. But before we do that one, have you had great contacts with your readers, or do you have good stories about readers?
I've had some amazing reader interaction. There's a lady who lives in Calgary, and she started writing to me, oh, a couple of years ago, and she's a little bit disabled, and she was on, had opioid addiction, and but she kind of weaned herself
Oh
off this
dear,
stuff, and
bless her
she's
heart.
an incredible woman who has overcome an awful lot, many, many different things, and she's, chronically ill, and she'll write to me these long kind of essays about how wonderful my characters are, and how my characters being wonderful reflects on
Oh,
how I must be a wonderful person. And by the end of it, it's just like I've been in therapy, but like immersed in "you are the best person ever" therapy, and that is, it's lovely, very
ah,
egotistical on my part, but it's lovely. And I've had two people write to me saying that, that I have somehow inspired them to start writing their own books, and they were subbing to agents and editors themselves. So that is very, very inspiring for me.
Your first reader interaction that you were talking about, this sounds like a really special person.
She is. I write to her, and she sends me research things now. She'll send me little notes, and I probably owe her a note back, actually, because she was sent me some scientist podcast recently that I need to listen to. She dissects my books in ways that I have not even thought about, and yeah, I'm always left with a really lovely feeling, and then a feeling that I need to actually write books worthy of her. She's my
Aw.
ideal reader, I guess. Is
Yes, yes. But isn't that fascinating too? How much power each of us individually has to make other people feel terrific.
Yeah, it is. It really
Yeah,
is.
that's lovely. Okay, here's another reader question. This is one of my, I think this is intriguing. If you could write a book with any author, alive or dead, who would you want to work with and why?
I was thinking about this, and I think, I- you know, I would love to meet and work with Nora Roberts. And
Hmm.
there's something about the way that she is so, and I'd like to think that I have a similar kind of work ethic, but she's so driven and so fast. I'd love to know how she manages to do that, and how she, puts a book together, and her thought process. And yeah, I think it would be Nora.
I was once at a book signing with Nora at a little mall. I think it was Walden Books back in those days. And I will never forget this. A reader came up to her and said, "Oh, I just love your books. I just wish you would write faster."
What?
And I think you could hear my jaw hit the floor. Because I don't know whether this reader thought or hoped that Nora and others could write as fast as she could read, but it was just, yeah,
Wow.
yeah. What do you read for fun?
Oh, I read romance. In fact, I when I was growing up, I remember the first books I read were kids' books, obviously, and then I discovered my grandmother's Mills and Boon novels, so I read all of those. And then I switched to fantasy books and sci-fi. I read all those, and a lot of literary books. But when I moved to Canada for the first time in 1997, oh no, 95, I discovered romantic suspense books of Linda Howard and Suzanne Brockman and Nora, and I basically kind of cleared out the library in a big way, and that's probably when I emptied the library, is when I decided that I would start writing my own books. I also just then moved back to Scotland, and Scotland, for some reason, had none of these books on the shelves in the library or in the bookstores, so it was a bit of a disaster. So I had to make my own entertainment. But now I definitely read, even when I try and read books that don't have romance in them, I get fed up. I like to have a romantic angle, and I'll read pretty much anything. I like steampunk, I like contemporary, I like fantasy, I love romantic suspense. But if I don't have the romance thing, it really just lacks something for me as a reader. So,
Mm.
but I also read and listen to tons and tons of autobiographies. So, um, yeah, I literally my shelves are full of FBI agents, and basically, and CIA agents, spies.
What's your favorite? What's your recent favorite of the autobiographies?
Ooh, there's a book called Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. He was a negotiator for the FBI. Yeah, fascinating to how people do that job.
Okay, terrific. And I am going to grab that book. Which of your books would you say is the best place for a new to you reader to start?
The Cold Justice series starts with a book called A Cold Dark Place, and that book happens to be free on all platforms in digital format. So I would say
Mm.
that's probably a pretty good place to start.
But are any of the books then one that you would consider possibly overlooked more than the others, even by your loyal readers? I think of them as orphan books.
My orphan, I think probably my book called The Killing Game is probably a bit of an orphan book, although, and it's probably my favorite, although I don't really like to have favorites. It's it's a snow leopard biologist is the heroine, and then it's a British SAS soldier is the hero, set in the Wakhan Valley in Afghanistan. And it was actually nominated for a Rita. So, I mean, it's a pretty good book, but it's very, I think people are very used to seeing US military special forces and these guys out and about, and they're not so used to seeing the Brits. So I have a very soft spot for that book.
Is there anything I have not asked you that you wish I had?
You have so many questions and so many great questions. No, not really.
Okay.
No, I was thinking about it. I read your list and I was thinking, oh, what would I like to add to that? But really, nothing.
Where can readers find out more about you?
On my website, I just had a brand new website designed.
Oh.
And so that's good. I ToniAndersonAuthor.com.
And it's Toni, folks, and Anderson with the O-N. But we'll have it in the show notes so people can.
Thank you. And also, I'm on Facebook way too much, although less than I used to be. I'm better than I used to be. They're the main places online. But my new website, I'm quite pleased with it. I've always done my own in the past, so to have a professional do something was a thrill.
Okay, now we're going to wrap up with my favorite part. These are either ors, just rapid fire. Paper plates or best china?
Best china.
House decorating or gardening?
Gardening.
Ooh, let's see. I want to ask you questions about that. But appetizer or dessert?
Appetizer.
Binge watch or make the watching last as long as possible?
Binge watching.
Heels or slippers?
Slippers.
Now you said appetizer, but we'll still ask you ice cream or cake?
Cookies.
I don't think there's been a writer yet who's gotten through the whole list of just doing either or. White chocolate or dark chocolate?
White chocolate.
Pickup or sports car?
Probably pickup.
Cruise or trekking vacation?
Trekking.
Hot air balloon or train trip?
Train, heights, that whole thing. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Cat or dog?
Dog.
Coffee or tea?
Tea.
Nail polish or bare nails?
No, bare nails.
And the last one is have the best first or save the best for last?
Probably, I don't know. Probably best first, actually.
Okay. Well, it has been a delight, Toni. I really enjoyed time with you, and I hope the listeners will check out all your books and come back next week when we have a new author to talk about their stories and the stories behind the stories.
Oh,
thank you so
Pat.
much.
Thank you so much.
That's the show for this week. Hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for joining Authors Love Readers podcast. Remember, you can always find out more about our guest authors in the show notes, and you can find out more about me at www.patriciamclinn.com. You can also send in questions to be asked of future authors at podcast@authorslovereaders.com. Until next week, wishing you lots of happy reading. Bye.